There was a moment in the late 1970s when eating became something you could do while driving 70 miles an hour down an interstate. Not carefully, not thoughtfully, just efficiently. It didn't feel like a turning point at the time. It felt like convenience. And convenience, we were told, was progress. But somewhere in that shift, food stopped being something you sat down for. It became something you grabbed, something you squeezed out of a packet, something that came with a toy. This is about what happened when an entire food system was redesigned not to nourish you, but to scale. In 1948, two brothers in San Bernardino redesigned a kitchen. They called it the Speedy Service System. Assembly line principles applied to hamburgers. 15-second production times, no plates, no waitstaff, no deviation. It wasn't just fast, it was replicable. And that replicability became the blueprint for every chain that followed. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Taco Bell, they didn't just sell food, they sold systems, franchises, uniformity across state lines. By 1970, there were over 1,600 McDonald's locations in the United States. By 1980, that number tripled. By 1990, you couldn't drive through most American towns without seeing golden arches. But scaling a restaurant is not the same as scaling a recipe. When you industrialize food, you don't just make more of it, you change it. Here's what had to happen for a burger to cost 99 cents in 1985. The beef couldn't come from a local butcher. It had to come from a centralized processing plant that could handle tens of thousands of cattle per day. The cattle had to grow faster, so they were fed corn and soy instead of grass. Not because it was better for them, but because it was cheaper and fattened them in half the time. The bun couldn't be baked fresh. It had to survive weeks in transit. So it was loaded with dough conditioners, emulsifiers, high fructose corn syrup to keep it soft and sweet, and preservatives like calcium propionate. The pickles were soaked in aluminum sulfate to stay crisp. The ketchup was thickened with xanthan gum. The grill flavor was added via liquid smoke and artificial flavoring compounds because actual grilling at scale was inconsistent. Even the lettuce was treated, shredded in facilities and washed in chlorine solutions to extend shelf life. None of this was illegal. None of it was hidden. It was just efficient. And it worked. The price stayed low, the taste stayed familiar, and the lines got longer. By the 1980s, the average fast food meal contained ingredients that didn't exist 50 years earlier. Sodium aluminum phosphate in the pancakes, tertiary butyl hydroquinone, TBHQ, in the nuggets, dimethyl polysilicone, an anti-foaming agent also used in silicone caulking in the fryer oil. These weren't accidents, they were solutions. TBHQ kept oil from going rancid. Sodium aluminum phosphate made batter rise faster and more uniformly. Dimethyl polysilicone stopped fryers from bubbling over during high-volume production. None of these chemicals were acutely toxic. The FDA approved them. But they were optimized for one thing: production at scale. Not digestion, not long-term health, not nutrient density. Just speed, consistency, shelf stability. And because they were included in tiny amounts, parts per million, they didn't require prominent labeling. They were listed in fine print, if at all. So families ate them 3, 4, 5 times a week. Kids grew up on them. And the body, which evolved over millennia to recognize fats, proteins, and sugars in their whole food forms, began receiving something else. In 1980, the childhood obesity rate in the United States was 5%. By 2000, it was 15%. By 2020, it was 20%. That's not genetics, Genetics don't change in 40 years. That's environment. Fast food wasn't the only factor, but it was ubiquitous, cheap, engineered to be craveable, and it trained an entire generation's palate. The high fructose corn syrup in the buns and sauces didn't just add sweetness, it bypassed normal satiety signals. Unlike glucose, which the body regulates tightly, fructose is metabolized primarily in the liver, where excess gets converted directly into fat. The industrial seed oils, soybean, canola, corn, used in fryers were high in omega-6 fatty acids. In small amounts, omega-6 is essential, but the American diet went from a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 to nearly 20-to-1. That imbalance is linked to chronic inflammation, a root factor in heart disease, diabetes, and autoimmune disorders. The hyperpalatability, the combination of salt, fat, and sugar in ratios that don't exist in nature, triggered dopamine responses in the brain similar to addictive substances. Not identical, but similar enough that people kept coming back. And because these meals were cheap and fast, they replaced home cooking. Families who once prepared food together began eating in cars, in front of TVs, alone. It wasn't just what was eaten, it was how. By the 1990s, fast food wasn't an occasional treat. It was infrastructure. Birthday parties at McDonald's, high school lunch courts with Taco Bell and Pizza Hut counters, hospitals with subways in the lobby. It became so embedded that questioning it felt strange, out of touch. If you suggested that a chicken nugget shouldn't contain 30 ingredients, you sounded paranoid. If you asked why French fries needed 13 chemicals to taste like potatoes, you were being difficult. The industry had normalized itself. And it did so through marketing that didn't feel like marketing. Playgrounds, mascots, collectible toys, sponsorships of youth sports leagues. It built itself into childhood. And once it was there, it became invisible. Here's what the long-term studies started showing in the 2000s. Children who ate fast food more than 3 times a week had significantly higher rates of asthma, eczema, and rhinitis. The proposed mechanism: chronic low-grade inflammation from trans fats and omega-6 overload. Adults who consumed fast food regularly had elevated markers of metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess abdominal fat, abnormal cholesterol, even when controlling for calorie intake. It wasn't just about eating too much, it was about what the food was doing inside the body. The emulsifiers that kept sauces smooth were found to disrupt the gut lining, thinning the mucus barrier that protects against bacteria. The preservatives that extended shelf life altered the composition of gut microbiota, the trillions of bacteria that regulate digestion, immunity, and even mood. The body adapted, but adaptation isn't the same as thriving. People felt fine until they didn't. And by the time symptoms appeared, chronic fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, anxiety, insulin resistance, the connection to diet was hard to trace. Because it wasn't one meal, it was decades of them. Fast food didn't just change bodies, it changed economics. In 1970, Americans spent 26% of their food budget on food eaten outside the home. By 2010, that number was 50%. Cooking skills declined. In surveys, nearly half of American adults reported they didn't know how to prepare a meal from scratch. Grocery stores responded by filling shelves with pre-made, pre-seasoned, microwavable meals that mimicked fast food convenience. The same additives, the same formulations, just reheated at home. The industrial food system had won, not through force, through convenience. And once convenience becomes the default, anything slower feels like deprivation. For decades, there was no widespread alarm. Documentaries came and went, studies were published in medical journals. A few activists raised concerns. But the system was too big, too profitable, too normalized. And the messaging was always the same: personal responsibility. If you eat too much, that's on you. If your kids are overweight, that's your fault. There was no discussion of engineered hyperpalatability, no talk of regulatory capture, where food industry executives sat on the boards of agencies meant to regulate them. No mention of subsidies that made corn and soy cheap, which made high fructose corn syrup and seed oils ubiquitous. The conversation was always about the individual, never the system. And so the system continued. You can't taste emulsifiers. You can't see inflammation. You can't feel your gut bacteria shifting. But the body knows. It knows when it's being fed food designed for profit instead of nourishment. It knows when ingredients have been stripped, replaced, reconstituted. It knows the difference between an apple and apple-flavored product. But we stopped listening because the alternative was inconvenient, expensive, time-consuming, and we were told that convenience was progress. There was no single villain in this story, no evil scientist in a lab, just a series of decisions, each one rational in isolation. Make it cheaper, make it faster, make it scale. But when you optimize food for everything except the human body, something breaks. Not loudly, not all at once, quietly, over decades. And by the time you notice, it's already everywhere. This is just one chapter. There are others.